Hello everyone. This is a continuation of the previous discussion I had and recorded, and we've been talking about metaphysics. So in this section I'm going to talk about the theories of mind and what a mind is that we're going to be looking at in this class. And to give you a sense of what we're going to be covering here, I'm going to talk about theories of mind, and particularly the four theories we're covering in the class. These are dualism, behaviorism, reductive materialism, and functionalism. And what I will do is I'm going to give you some brief descriptions of them, trying to illustrate and explain what the basic ideas of the theory are in terms of how they describe what a mind is. And then I'm going to go over the basic arguments that are there. This is the really condensed version. I'm going to give you just a few sentences to give you the idea of what the main argument is that people present for these theories. So to begin, we're going to look at dualism. Sorry about that, lost my slide for a second. And this is the theory that says we're composed of two substances. One is the body. This is the physical component of what we are. I mean, we look at it, we use it to touch things, we use it to see things. But then the other component is that we're composed of a mental substance. This is Descartes' terminology, a physical and a mental substance. And the physical substance is our body, but the mental substance are the thoughts, emotions, feelings we have, what we usually associate with our consciousness, and those thoughts we have and what goes on in our minds. And one of the issues that we have to deal with in this problem, this view, is how these two substances interact. So how we manage to say our thoughts can control our body when the mental substance really doesn't have any physical properties, and vice versa. How can something that when it affects our body ends up changing our mind or causing us to feel pain, getting excited, something tastes good? Those type of questions are what dualism has to deal with. But it's still the fundamental theory that most people start with. And the reason for this one is it just takes a bit of reflection, and people will start looking at the theory and go, yeah, that makes sense. If I stop and think about it, I can look at my body, I see it, it's completely distinct from my thoughts. My thoughts, while they're located in the location in my head, in the brain, they're definitely not that physical brain thing. There's something different about those. So the main argument given for this is that it's a base of it based on introspection. And that's pretty much what Descartes says. He says, I can't doubt that I'm thinking, but I can doubt my body. So there does seem to be this dualistic nature to what we mean by a human being and a human body versus a human mind. And they have to be two different things. And that's the basic idea of dualism. So we have a physical body, and then we have a mental something, whether it's a mind, we want to call it that, if we want to call it a soul, whatever. So that there's that two parts to what we consider a mind, and the mind is the mental part. Now, this contrasts the theory of dualism went along until about the 1900s, and science came along and started questioning things, and behaviorism raised the question, well, if we really are this dualistic thing with a body and a mental substance, where's that mental substance? Why can't we see it? And so maybe it's just better off to talk about things in terms of the behaviors and what we can actually see. So you have Homer here, and this is Homer. And clearly, looking at him, you can tell he's happy. He's woohooing it up. So we know the mental state of being happy is really the behaviors he is exhibiting. Somebody's excited, they're raising their arms, they're screaming, they're yelling. That's what we mean by happy. If we look at this person, oh, wait, I can see this person is studying. That's what it is. They're engaged in thought, they're taking notes, they're turning pages in a book. Those types of behaviors are what we mean when we say studying. Even though studying is a mental activity, and just like being happy is a mental activity in an emotional sense, this is what behaviorism claims is really what we should be talking about when we talk about the mind. It's those behaviors we associate with mental states, because we can't really describe what those mental states are and have any meaning to them, because we can't associate that terminology with something real in the world. So this is where this whole idea of ghost in the machine comes in. We shouldn't really be talking about any ghost in the machine. There's no soul or mind mysteriously hidden in our body. But we should talk about what we can verify. And in terms of mind, these mental states, that's really the behaviors that we can see. So the best way to understand the mind, according to behaviorism, is to look at the behaviors people exhibit that are associated with the various mental states. You can think about it. Really simple example. What is pain? Well, I know what it feels like in my mind, but for other people, when they see me, if they see me jumping around, screaming, yelling, probably swearing at some point, that's pain. That's exhibiting the behaviors that are associated with that mental state. So really, that's all the mind is for behaviorism. And now we come to a little more advanced theories. And this one is probably the one that's most well accepted at this point, and it's called reductive materialism. And if we think about it, we start here with someone, it's their mind, everything that goes on the mind, or our thoughts and emotions, that's fine. It's our thinking, how intelligent we are. When we talk about feelings, that's fine. We can talk about it in that language. But as science develops, we're actually looking more and more and realizing that what happens when we say someone has experienced an emotion, a certain part of the brain will start to stimulate, and we can see the chemical reaction, and we can measure the electricity that's now happening. And we see that these different lobes in these different areas of the brain are associated with different emotional and mental states. So it's really, if we look at it from the internal perspective, we describe it in terms of mental language, but if we look at it from an external perspective, when I'm looking at someone else, the best way to understand it is in terms of those physical, chemical, electrical reactions that are going on in that physical brain. So keep taking that in mind. What they say we should do is really realize it's the same thing. We're just using two different languages to describe the same thing. And this can be thought of in terms of, at one time there was a group of people who would say that, you can use a children's analogy here, thunder is God bowling, or the angels bowling, so that's the noise. But then a scientist will describe it in terms of the how the air temperature changes so rapidly when there's a bolt of lightning that it creates a sound wave, and that's all thunder is. It's two different ways to describe it. Now, this one doesn't work out quite as well, because whether there's angels bowling or not is a little more difficult to verify, but we can think of what the mind is in the same way. We have one way of describing it. It's emotions, it's feelings, it's intelligence. It's those things when we describe what our internal states are versus the way someone from an external perspective would describe what's going on. And the person that's external would describe it in terms of what neurons are firing, which areas of the brain are being stimulated, which chemicals are going through a person's bloodstream at this point. They're describing the exact same thing, and eventually we should be able to line those up. That's the goal of science. We want to reduce it down to what we can observe and measure and do things like that. So that's the idea of reductive materialism, that we're slowly able to make those two types of languages and recognize that they're describing the same thing, and we'll have that correspondence between the mental description and the physical description. But they're really describing the same thing. And just as a quick aside on this, there's a group of these people that go even further, and they call it eliminative materialism. And their view is we should just eliminate the entire language of mental speak. So get rid of the idea of emotions and intelligence and thoughts, because it's really just the physical process that's going in the brain, and we're better off if we talk in that way. So this view gets pushed a little further. I just talked about reductive materialism for this class because I think that's the one that's much more widely accepted and viewed at this time. Now, why is this theory accepted? Because science is proving that these things are the same. The more we do measurements and learn about the structure of the brain and what goes on in the brain, we're seeing there's that correspondence. When somebody feels happy, there's certain endorphins and chemicals and electrical processes that are going on in the brain and in very specific areas. When they're puzzled about something, a different area of the brain is working. So we can start to see this. And in doing that, now we can start to make sense of the problem of dualism, where they couldn't explain how the mental and the physical are able to interact with each other. By reducing it to the same thing, we can see, oh, it's just a different way of describing it. It's that internal description versus the external description. So they're really doing the same thing. So when I say I'm thinking of moving my arm, it's not that the mental substance of my mind has to move my arm, my physical body, but it's just a different way of describing that electrical chemical process of taking in information, having the central nervous system stimulate the nerves down into my arm, and I lift my arm. So we don't have that interaction problem anymore. But this is really based on a lot of what science is doing in neuropsychology and all of those fields like that. And finally, we come to functionalism. And this is becoming kind of a replacement of behaviorism, but it's also, with computer science, becoming more widely accepted. In functionalism, what they argue is that the mind should be understood as what it is that provides that interaction between the environment, the processing area of the mind, whether it's brain or whatever, that takes in that information, and then the action that the person actually takes. So the mind is the thing that makes sense of how our thoughts interact with our environment and then allow us to take actions. And for most human beings, this involves a central nervous system. That's what the mind is. It's the brain, central nervous system, the peripheral nerves, all of that. That's what the mind is. It allows us to take in information, process it, and then turn around and do some action. So a lot of this has become related to a computer science view of what the mind is. The mind functions like a computer. So that's the best way to understand it. Now, one of the things that can result by taking this view is ET can have a mind. We're no longer committed to saying a mind has to be associated with the brain, which is one of the issues that reductive materialism is tied into. We can say, no, it's not necessarily a central nervous system. That just happens to be the way the human being is able to take in input from the environment, process it, understand it, and then turn around and do actions. But somebody else in some other being might have a different way of doing that. So they might not have a central nervous system, but they'll have some other physiological process for doing it. And even more so, this opens the possibility that a mind can be a machine can have a mind. Because as long as something serves the function of taking in information from the environment, understanding the environment, processing that information, and then determining what action to take based on that, we call that a mind. That's the function of the mind, so we should be describing it and explaining what the mind is in that term of that relationship between environment, what goes on in that brain, the mind, and how we act. Those three elements and how they are interacted and dealt with, that's what a mind is. So this opens the possibility for artificial intelligence. So what's the argument here? And the basic argument is going to be that the mind is whatever allows us to perform the role of taking in information, making decisions, and acting on that information. Whether that's a central nervous system, a physical nervous system like humans have, whether it's a computer like artificial intelligence that we're conceiving of, or whether it's an alien being, it still has a mind because it performs those same functions. So that's the basic idea of functionalism as well as the other theories. And finally, so at this point, if you have any questions on these theories, feel free to ask me. The discussion for the Theories of Mind module is going to have you present these theories and discuss them, but if you do have other questions at the same time, feel free to contact me and I'll try to answer the questions.